Welcome to On the Level, broadcasting from the Blue Ocean Network studios here in Beijing. My name is Fergus Thompson. Now, of course, it's not news that more and more foreigners are calling China home. Many of these come here initially to study. Some of them may be posted here by their overseas companies. Indeed, many are employed or recruited by Chinese companies, sometimes even the Chinese government. But increasing numbers of them are choosing self-employment and establishing their own small businesses here in China. Well, my guest today, Bridget Rooth, is well placed to describe both the rewards and perhaps the challenges of going it alone in China. Back in 2008, she set up an online English editing business called English Trackers, and it's been going strong ever since. Bridget Rooth, welcome to On the Level.
Thank you, Fergus.
You didn't come here initially to set up a business. Before we look at your business and actually setting up something on your own here, how did you come to China? You were back in from 2003, I believe.
Yes, I came with my family, with my partner, who had been invited over by the Chinese government, and we came with our 3 children. Mm-hmm. And initially, as I came from France, I'm bilingual, I was very lucky and I got a job with a French law firm because of my English skills, which sounds ironic. And so I worked for the French law firm for 4 years, helping them with communications and translation and sort of middle management role.
Right. So then what spurred you to move away from safe employment with somebody paying your salary each month to going out and setting up not on home turf, but in a foreign country, and a very foreign country?
Good question. Well, I had a bit of a lucky break when I first arrived due to my French-English skills. And I was asked by the French Chamber of Commerce to translate a speech overnight for journalists for a visiting minister. And that gave me an intro into the French Chamber of Commerce. And then they started employing me on a freelance basis to do some translations from French to English, and word of mouth got around. And I realized there was a need for good quality English. And at the same time, some companies were coming to me and asking for English editing. So I thought, rather than staying in the law firm where I was only dealing with legal documents, it might be more fun and more interesting to be a sort of outsourcing department for many companies so they could call on us to edit English. So that's how I came up with the original idea.
Right, so like any business, you saw what you thought was a niche here, and you said, this suits me, I can take this part on, and you went ahead with it.
Yeah.
Just explain a little bit about this business, what you actually do, because it's not something that might automatically be self-explanatory to somebody in the States, English editing online.
So the idea is that we help non-native English speakers, so it could be individuals, could be government entities or companies with their English writing. So for instance, you're a company, say you're Spanish, you want to have your website in English, you write it in-house yourself in English because you know your products or your services, and then you send it to us, and we have professional editors who are around the world who will then edit it up to native level. And it all goes through a website. So the client uploads the document, pays, the editors do all the editing, it gets checked in-house, and then the client comes back to collect it. Okay. So the idea was to make it very easy for people to find a trustworthy source for editing, because many people will be, oh, my friend's good at English, or, my wife's a native English speaker, but are they good enough, or do they really know what they're doing, or what's their grammar or syntax like? So that's why I set up the system.
So that's the business. Now, how do you actually go from an idea like that to saying, okay, I'm going to have a business and I'm going to be a business owner in China, I'm going to run it here and I'm going to have an office and everything. What is the system here? There's a term called, it sounds like a child's imitation of a dog, a woofie. Yeah. Explain a little bit about what that is.
Okay, so, well, you have several choices if you want to set up a company here. And the one that the foreigners choose the most is what you refer to as the woofie, which stands for Wholly Foreign Owned Enterprise. This means that you're actually going to invest money from outside of China. So you bring money in to set up the company. It belongs to you 100%, so you have no Chinese partners, and you can control everything. So that was the benefit that I saw, as opposed to my other option. Well, I had 2 other options. One was legal, which was to have a joint venture, which means I would have had to have a Chinese partner.
That has to be a Chinese citizen.
Yes, or a Chinese company it could have been. But it's not that I was against that, it's just that I didn't have anybody that was there. And also, as I was working in a law firm and we dealt with a lot of problems with joint ventures, like unjoining them, I had seen the slightly darker side of joint ventures. And we also did a lot with intellectual property, and I'd seen a lot of nasty stuff going on, so I probably had a slightly biased look. So I chose to go the woofie route.
Right.
And the other option would be to borrow a Chinese person's name, what we call a prête-nom, but that's actually illegal, strictly speaking. And then you get the Chinese person to set up the company, but then you don't really control it. So this could be
So in theory, they're just
risky.
a name, and,
Yes.
and you're really dependent on their goodwill or whatever.
Exactly.
Okay, so you went down this route, which, as you said, most people tend to do. Woofie. Now, we're talking about small businesses here, somebody setting up an individual company, but this is also the same system that big international companies use.
Yes.
If they come in, like perhaps Apple or something, they set up one of these.
Yeah.
Is it a very involved process in doing it? Because people have this idea about China, very bureaucratic, heavy government. How long does it take, for example?
Well, I wouldn't say it's not difficult, but it's not easy. It's really a matter of getting all your ducks in a row. It's a matter of being very careful about all the documents you need to prepare. So, for instance, when I say it isn't difficult, I actually set up my own woofie with the help of an assistant who worked at the law firm where I work. We happened to quit at the same time, and then she was at a loose end. And so I said, well, will you help me?
So you didn't go to some sort of agency?
No. And so I just paid her 3 months' salary. We came to an agreement, and I had a Chinese lawyer friend, and he and I, between us, wrote all the articles of association, etc., and the business scope.
Right.
And then the assistant translated it into Chinese, because everything will be registered in Chinese. So
Right.
it's a good idea to do all the documents in English, because you need to have a grip on what's going on.
Sure.
And then they will be translated and they will be registered. The Chinese versions are actually registered at the Administration Bureau.
Right. And the length of this, you said, was about 3 months?
It took us 3 months. Also, I set up a services woofie in an area that's not in the least bit controlled, so there's not going to be any problem from the government in terms of setting up a company
it's
like
not
I did.
Publishing a magazine where there might be sensitivity or what goes in it.
Or education or any of those spheres which are still quite controlled by the government.
So are these companies licenses given to operate in a certain area?
Yes, you have to, in a certain scope. So you have to write your scope into your articles of association. I mean, if you're in services, you're in services. You can't suddenly be teaching, because that would be another license. So there's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing that happens at the beginning, in so much as you have to have a lease. You have to have signed a lease, so you have to have an office in order to go and submit your dossier to create a company. So that seems a bit strange for me, because you don't know whether your company is going to go through. And yet you have to have put down money, and often you have to pay 6 months up front with many Chinese landlords. So, that was a bit of a worry. And it's pretty difficult to find small offices, although we ended up moving into a shop, which was the smallest space.
But you are taking a gamble in that putting the money down for that lease, it doesn't come through.
But it seems like everyone can set up their woofie. I haven't met anyone that's been outright refused, but what will happen is they'll refuse certain aspects of it, like they might make you bring in more capital than you anticipated, or they might change your scope, or might be a question of visas, because obviously you can only have so many visas per foreign people in your company.
This means that you can employ foreigners to work as well as Chinese people?
The way that works is most woofies will get 2 visas for foreigners. So it's usually you, the CEO, and then one other person. And then after that, it's quite difficult to get more visas for foreigners. I've heard it said that for every 25 Chinese you employ, you can then get another foreign visa.
Right.
I don't know if that's accurate, but hasn't been too much of a problem for me, because most of my editors work outside of China.
So it's set up, or you go through this process of setting it up, but you've obviously, as you said, you have to bring in capital, invest capital. Cost-wise, is it expensive? You did it on your own?
No, it wasn't for me. So I paid the assistant about 1,000 euros, a little less. And in 3 months, she gave me a huge stack of papers and all my chops, which is like your signature in China, and said, right, you're ready to roll. I brought 10,000 euros in from France, where I'd lived before, because I didn't need more capital than that. But you have to think carefully about the amount of capital you bring in, because if you want to top it up later, it's almost like setting up your company again. Right. It's very tedious.
So is there a minimum amount of capital involved?
At the time when I set mine up in 2008, it was only 3,000 euros, I think. But now people say it's between up to 6 and 10.
Right. So maybe $8,000.
But this is capital that you can use immediately. So as soon as it's in your bank account, you can use it for whatever you like, salaries or buying assets or whatever.
You mentioned that you had an assistant there, a Chinese assistant, who was helping out and translating and so on. I know that you have studied Chinese yourself, but Is it necessary for somebody who's doing this to speak and write good Chinese to be able to go through the documents?
No, I don't think so, because although I speak everyday Chinese and I can read a certain amount of text messages and I can read a little bit of websites, I couldn't do that when I arrived, obviously. I can't read anything that would be useful because I don't know enough characters. So I couldn't read my articles of association in Chinese. I could probably find the capital or something like that. So no, I know many foreigners who run companies here, even people that have been here 10 or 15 years and they still don't speak the language, more than taxis, restaurants. So I don't think it's important to get someone you trust, though. And I was very lucky. I've had the same girl with me for 6 years. Right. I trust her implicitly. She has the chops, which is basically the equivalent of my signature. She has my bank chop, and yeah, we have to trust each other.
I suppose it's also going to depend a little bit on the area of business you're in. If you're dealing with a lot of Chinese clients and customers, then it's obviously going to be easier if you do speak the language. But depending on sort of the area that you're in. Doing business in China notoriously involves what are called, very often referred to here as unwritten rules, which basically means this is what the law says, this is what actually happens. Is this something that you came up against, or were you able to follow the letters of law and find that it was okay?
Well, having worked in a law firm, I absolutely did want to follow the letters of the law. So in terms of when I hired my assistant, I told her I want to take the legal route. So if it's painful, it will be painful. And she understood that. And several times she would say, oh, we could do this with money, or we could do that. And I'd be, no, I want to do it legally. But we did have one situation where a new landlord, when we moved into a new office, between the time we built our office and the time we could change our license, our business license, the laws in China had changed, which is something that happens a lot. Yes. And so then you have to kind of run to keep up. And they could no longer register us in their building because you're only allowed to have foreign companies in certain buildings. And so this was a real issue because we'd invested money literally building the office. And so the landlord said, well, don't worry, we've got another building down the road. We'll just register you there. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. And they tried very hard. There were several companies in the same situation. And it would have been very complicated. We would have had to have our tax computer in this other office down the road. And we would have been illegally in this. But in the end, I don't know exactly what happened. I certainly didn't, pass any money or anything, but finally everything was resolved. Right. And
but your advice would be, despite whatever pressure, either from the Chinese side or from other foreigners here, to go around it or take a loophole, you would say, no, stick to what the law says, even if it seems awkward.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, there are companies here who complain that because they do that, it takes them a lot longer to get licenses or permission or etc. But yeah, I think it's just up to you. I mean, it's how you want to go to bed at night and feel about what you do and how you do it. And it hasn't really been a problem for me.
There's another aspect of doing business in China, and that is so much is based on personal relationships, what's called guanxi here. So this means that people will invest a lot of time in developing a relationship with somebody, and then afterwards the business comes. Whereas in a European or an American setting, it might be, let's get down to business, stop the table and make the deal and all go home for tea. How do you get around that here?
Well, I definitely built my business initially with the expats, with the foreigners, because it was very easy for me to go to the French chamber and find French companies that needed help with English, or through the European chamber. That was a lot easier than persuading a Chinese company that it really is important to have good English, where a lot of them still don't understand the need for this kind of quality, or perhaps they have an in-house person who's got a degree in English and they think therefore that person is good enough, and they're definitely not good enough. Sure. So I still.
So you started in the community you knew.
Yeah, exactly. I took the easy route. I mean, I just built my network out from school, from social, from sports, from all those different areas, and sometimes I would get into Chinese companies through a foreigner. So maybe a foreigner would typically have a role like marketing, communication, strategy, and so then I would get introduced through that person into a Chinese company.
So you've expanded this now to working with both foreign companies here and Chinese companies. Is there any difference in your way of working with these two different types of clients? Because there's a different social system, to be honest.
I think so. I find with the foreign clients, it's definitely easier for me. I mean, we come from similar cultures, whether it's Spanish or, French or which other nationality. And I think because I've generally been recommended to them by someone else, because that's the way it works here, the trust is there immediately. So they never ask me questions like, well, who are your editors, or are they qualified, or anything about quality control. They just trust that I will do a good job, and that I will deliver it on time, and and I trust them to pay me. So I think that trust is there from the outset. Whereas I have found with the Chinese clients, they're much more suspicious of me, and they will ask me, well, who are your editors, and can we see their CVs, and perhaps also they're not quite as respectful in terms of agreed deadlines, and I find that difficult. Now not so much, because I just tell them this is the way we work. If we say 3 days, it's because we need to look at the document, 2 people will look at it, and I can't deliver it in a day if we've agreed 3 days, because I've put everything in place. So, yeah.
So they are doing what you would say is more due diligence, because
yes,
that's what you do in Chinese business.
Exactly.
You really have to check people out before you go ahead.
Exactly.
And they're doing this. And also, I would presume that you haven't set up that relationship with them at the beginning. Perhaps the second, would you find it, if you go back to the same company, is it a lot easier? Is it a different relationship?
Yeah. But then what can happen is if your contact leaves, then you're back to zero. That happened to me with a massive Chinese translation company here, where I worked with them regularly, and then the girl I worked with left, and then there didn't seem to be any handover from her to the new person, and then you have to start all over again, prove yourself all over again, despite the fact that you may have worked with them for some time. So that's tedious, whereas that doesn't happen with foreign companies. They'll just be like, these are our service providers, and then you just carry on with the new person.
So it seems that there's a much more personal element in dealing with the Chinese company. Your link was with that particular woman. When she left, then it was back to the beginning again.
Yeah.
You mentioned there starting off with the foreign community here, and Beijing is a city of, you could say, 20 million people, and people might think this is a huge city to do business in. But is it like that if you were dealing with the expat foreign community here?
No, I don't think so. It's like a small village. I always say that my life spans about 30 minutes of cycling in any direction. So I've met clients in the strangest of places. I picked up a client once in a hot yoga class, so doing my yoga in
Picked him up commercially, we're talking
yes,
now, right?
Of course, in my skimpy shorts and little top, and then later, find myself in his office where he's saying, "Oh, it's nice that we've got more clothes on this time." I've met people in bars. I've, talking to foreigners that way. I once met a client on a plane going back to London. So, and I had 3 children initially at school here. Now I've only got 1 left. So I met a lot of parents through school, so that really helped me with, my children went to the French school, so obviously a lot of French companies need my services, so that helped me to grow my network in the French community. And as there is this feeling of trust, and perhaps there aren't that many companies, or if any, in Beijing that do what I do, then if people ask for a recommendation, it immediately comes to me. So I think I'm very lucky in that sense,
Could be perhaps compared to working in a small town in America, where you would know people, meet them in the same places socially, as well as doing business with them, and having that sort of social interaction. Yeah,
I think there's a lot of crossover between business and social here. And as soon as you meet people, even though we hate to do it, you always ask, what do you do, who do you work for? And you sort of get that straight, because we're all floating and we all want to help each other. And I think there's a massive amount of support, and I've really, really appreciated that. And in my office, where we were 35 European companies, we all moved in together, we all built our offices together. There's a massive amount of support. There's very much an open door feeling, and we can wander into each other's offices and borrow assistants, or printers, or their knowledge. We do a lot of bartering between us, and that's been a fantastic opportunity, I think. And
on a more official level of helping out companies here, most countries here have a Chamber of Commerce. You've got the US Chamber of Commerce, the British Chamber of Commerce, French, etc. Do these, at a more formal level, do these organisations, do you find them helpful for somebody who's coming to set up a business here?
Yes, I'm going to sound a bit disgruntled now, but the trouble with the chambers is they're not really aimed at small businesses like mine. So it's too expensive for me or any small business here to be a member of a chamber, because it's about €1,000 a year. So for €1,000 of input, I think you need to get quite a lot back. But that doesn't stop me going to their events, or joining their training programs or anything like that. So I think it's a bit difficult when you're small. I think they need to have some kind of micro enterprise sort of setup.
To keep this business alive and going, apart from hopefully the business being successful, what do you have to do on the paperwork side? Is there a lot of paperwork to do?
No, I don't think there's any more than any other country. But obviously, I mean, every year going to renew your business license, probably don't have to do that in the UK or in America. But what can be tedious is that they change the rules. And so, for instance, we have it's a very strict system of tax here. And every time you get paid, you have to issue what they call a fapiao, which is like an official receipt. As soon as the money goes into your bank account, the following month, the tax office, which is linked to your bank account, believe it or not, withdraws the tax from your bank account. So whether you've been paid by the client or not, the money goes out. So certain things like that quite difficult to cope with in terms of cash flow. But for instance, we were with one tax office, our district, and then they said, no, you're now with a national tax office. So that was a cost to us. We had to change all the system, change the machines we use, get new software, and that's the kind of thing I find a little bit frustrating. But, that's why you have your absolutely brilliant Chinese assistant that you've carefully selected at the outset, because I really, I just sign and chop, and everything else is in her hands.
Do you think there are many opportunities for people coming into Beijing, spending a couple of years to get to know the place, or Shanghai, or wherever it happens to be, and then setting up their own small business?
I wouldn't wish it on anyone to come in and set up a business without having lived here for a bit, because it's not really the language. I mean, the language is not a problem in that there's many people you can find to help you, and many Chinese have absolutely excellent English or French or both skills. But I think it's just understanding how the system works, who you can trust, building a little bit of a network that's like your safety net. Because I'm always asking other entrepreneurs, well, what do you do? And what are we going to do now that there's this new regulation? And so I think you need to have that support network in place, really, before setting up a company. And it's not as cheap as it used to be. In the old days, we didn't have to pay social security, social insurance for foreigners. Now we do. So that's really made the cost of hiring someone, even if it's yourself, a lot higher. I think my advice would be really be sure of your niche, really be sure, because it's as competitive as everywhere else. I think the boon days are perhaps over in terms of, people could come in and set up a French boulangerie because nobody was making French bread. Well, now hundreds of people are doing that. So that's a corny example, but there was a time to ride that wave, and it's now over. So I think you have to be very careful.
You have been on both sides now. You have worked as an employee for a company here, for a foreign company, and you've set up your own. It may be difficult to compare the two, but would you prefer one situation or the other?
No, I like being my own boss, and I'm very happy. I think the part that I love the most about having my company is because we've become a hub for English expertise, let's say. We're now doing a lot more things than just editing. So we now create content for some companies, or we go in and help them, for instance, set up an in-house newsletter. We'll help them get it all going. We'll help write the content for them. And it's up to me to say yes or no to all these projects that come my way, and that's a real pleasure. I mean, the problem of having a job that you keep for many years is it's repetitive. What I do, it's never repetitive. I mean, one day we're helping a carpet manufacturer from Holland, and the next day I might be working for the UN in China, and anything in between. So I think that is the thrill. Obviously, financially, it was a real struggle at the beginning, because you always underestimate. I mean, if there's any advice about doing a business plan, it's never going to be as rosy as you think. And so that was definitely a struggle. But then, there's real bumper times, and that's just fantastic.
As you said, things don't always go right. Now, if it comes to the stage that a business is not making money anymore, and you must have come across these from from people what do you do with this? Is it the same as another country where you just say, well, that's it, we're closing our doors and we either owe money or we don't, or we go bankrupt? Is it, if you want to get out, is it easy?
I don't think it's that easy. I don't know anything about going bankrupt. I don't know how that works. But I do know that if you want to officially close a woofie, it's actually basically more expensive than setting one up. And I made some inquiries a few years ago. I was told anything from between it would be about $10,000 or $6,000 to $10,000, and that's because the Chinese government or the tax office or all the offices make you jump through a lot of hoops in terms of audit, even though you do an audit every year. So it's actually a pretty stressful thing. I do know people that have just left the country. I don't know what happens. I'm not sure whether you can come back.
Well,
so,
that's the option. If you're not going
exactly.
to come back, but if you're going to do something
I
else
don't think that's a very
China.
good way to leave things, though, ever. The best thing is just to basically flip it onto someone else. So
sell it?
Yes, sell it. But say, for instance, someone's got a startup. So they've got a great idea and they want to hit the market running. Maybe they're in services like I am, and it might take them 3 to 6 months to set up a woofie. They're going to have to bring in the capital, even if it's only 10,000 euros. Maybe buying a woofie off me, which is already set up, means not putting in the capital, not going through all the stress of setting it up. It will still take a month and a half, but they can start working straight away. The fapias exist, so that's a good option. People do sell it to someone who wants to test their idea,
right.
maybe.
But they do have to be in very much the same area that you are working in, both physically, geographically, and also in the same area of business.
Well, you can adjust the scope to a certain extent, I think. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, so right. But you obviously have to rewrite the articles of association, etc. But it's still quicker than setting it up from scratch. Right. And obviously the benefit is not having to put the capital in. Maybe you don't have the capital, but maybe you don't have the time to go through all that process.
If you were to offer advice to somebody who is coming in here with whatever idea, either going along that route and buying into somebody else's or setting up their own business from scratch, what would be your key piece or pieces of advice to this budding entrepreneur in China?
I think be very careful about how you recruit people, whether they're Chinese or foreign, and particularly this person who's going to be your admin person, who's going to look after your license and your all your paperwork and do your visa application, and just keep an eye on all that. That person has to be someone who will stay with you. It's better. So I would say don't hire a young person who's cheap for that job. The girl I hired was already in her 30s, had already had a few jobs, was very stable, she was very good at what she did. And I think that would be one piece of advice. So don't rush to, my friend's got a friend who's got a friend. No, you really need to interview people, and you need to get someone who likes doing that, because it's tedious running from this office to that office, get this chop to get that chop, So I think that would be one. The other thing is be careful about your capital. Make sure you bring in enough, because it's not easy to bring in more. You have to basically start all over again. So, if it's a matter of another 10,000 euros, I would put it in, because obviously, it's easier to do that at the beginning. I think do your market research. I mean, you can do realistic market research. There's now some really good companies here that are foreign run with Chinese or even Chinese that have the links with foreigners that can do great market research. Chambers of Commerce can help, but I was going to say something negative. I didn't mean that. Chambers of Commerce can help. They already have a lot of data about China. And I just think be realistic. It's not El Dorado. Right. It's hard. It's competitive. It's a scrabble. So
you have been running this business now since 2008, as I said. You have a background. You've lived in many different countries in your time, both lived and studied in different countries. Yeah. Do you think you have to have that sort of international experience before you come here, or could somebody who spent all their life in Chicago come over here and do the same thing? Would they be different situations?
Difficult question. I definitely think it helps if you, like I grew up as an expat child, so I was used to the language and the changes, so I think that helps. Dealing with different cultures. Exactly, in terms of you don't have that. I always feel I'm a little bit rootless in that there's no place that I know that's home and that I know everyone and everything. So if you're coming from somewhere and you've always grown up there and you move here and you don't know, it's all new, maybe that's difficult. Whereas I don't find that difficult, because I'm used to always changing. All through my childhood, I lived in so many countries and it was a change all the time. So I think I love expat life. I love the whole starting again, the new challenge, the making the friends. So for me, it's a bit of a drug, I think, more than anything. Well, you've been here, as I said, some time now. Any plans to stay here with this business, or to go off and do something somewhere else? Actually, yes, plans to leave, because my last child will finish school. This is the last academic year, so I'm planning on leaving, and this will be my 12th year. So I think that's a good time to have spent here, and I'm hoping to move to South America to start a whole new adventure. Well, I'm sure, Bridget, with South America's, or Beijing's loss will be South America's gain. Thanks very much for coming on the level. Fergus.